expressed this sentiment before our friend used to take photos. So on the subject of, wouldn't it be nice if we lived in a simple world and we didn't have to grapple with any complexities or moral nuances. I'm trying to, basically, I've to oversimplify a little bit. There have been four basic positions which the left in the U.S. has been putting forth about Libya and about the Arab Spring generally. I'm going to, again, I acknowledge I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but sort of articulate these positions, and then maybe we can go around and see what people have to say. Given that we're supposed to be the anarchists here, and we're hopefully providing something which is a little bit more unorthodox. And one of the sort of the more meta question is whether anarchism has anything to do with the contemporary world of 2011. And of course, since we're all here today, I guess we all think that at least potentially it does. And certainly, and once again, the movements in the Arab world have been pretty non-ideological or post-ideological or whatever you want to call it, but they certainly seem to have they seem to be animated by an anti-authoritarian spirit. And I think that we all sensed that and drew a lot of inspiration from them, and still do, despite the fact that in the last month or so, month and a half now, since the military intervention, it's all become a little bit more complicated. All right, so I'm going to start with what I hope is not the most widespread position on the U.S. left, but I'm going to start with the stupidest position. And the reason I'm starting with the stupidest position is because it's unfortunately, it's the position which has been the most visible in terms of street protests here in New York City, which are under the virtual monopoly of the Workers' World Party and the International Action Center.
Why this guy is here? I don't understand. Why?
Excuse me?
Why New York Times is here to take pictures?
Because we may be getting some coverage of this event.
Where?
Where?
In the New York Times.
It really is.
You needed this?
Excuse me?
Why?
In New York City, the most visible position, which is also the stupidest position, which is what I call the reverse schizophrenic position, which is simply taking the mainstream media position, or not even the mainstream media position, forgive that word media again, which seems to be controversial, but the White House position, quite frankly, which is, the White House is basically taking the position that, we have to support the protesters in Libya and Syria, but we have to be extremely lukewarm at best in our support for the protesters in Bahrain and Jordan and Yemen. Of course, the White House has been paying lip service to the rights of the protesters in Bahrain and Yemen in Libya, but meanwhile has been continuing to fund the regimes which have been putting down these protesters very brutally. At the same time that it's been huffing and puffing about sanctions against Syria and has actually intervened in Libya. So obviously, completely hypocritical position. People are probably aware that yesterday the U.S.-supported regime in Yemen fired on protesters, as did the regime in Syria, which is on the outs with the U.S. So one of the ways in which I think that the Arab protest movements have represented something extremely hopeful is that it's gotten out of this whole ossified, sort of Cold War holdover that it's all about the U.S. And no, it's actually not about the U.S. It's about principle, it's about freedom, and it's about dictatorship, which is what it ought to be about. So unfortunately, Workers' World Party, and their front group International Action Center, which invariably jumps everyone else to the gun and gets the permit for the protests, has basically just reversed this position. If you go to their websites, we have to stand shoulder to shoulder with the protesters in Egypt and Yemen and Tunisia, but we also have to stand shoulder to shoulder with the dictatorship in Libya. So that's the worst and stupidest position has been, unfortunately, the most visible in terms of a street presence in New York City. Then Perhaps even stupider, although fortunately not quite as visible, is what I call the uniform pro-dictatorship position, which is, unfortunately, because of the regime change hubris of the Bush administration and the neocons, there's been this tendency on the left to rally around dictators and to view any protest movement anywhere in the world, any pro-democracy movement anywhere in the world, as just a so-called color revolution, like the Tulip Revolution, the Rose Revolution, and so on, which is completely astroturf and just completely, just puppets on the strings of the CIA and the State Department and George Soros. Now, and this is obviously ridiculous. Clearly the U.S. had a hand in the revolutions in Georgia and Kyrgyzstan and the Ukraine and so on, but the U.S. has not had any significant hand in the revolutions in the Arab world. Quite to the contrary, I think that the intervention in Libya is the clearest evidence that the U.S., like Al-Qaeda, has been playing catch-up, and that the Arab masses themselves have sort of really seized the initiative, and that all of the State Department and the CIA and the KGB and Al-Qaeda and everybody else have just been sort of left in the dust wondering what the hell to do. So this is a really, really bad position, which unfortunately I've been reading a lot of on places like Counterpunch. The most widespread position I would call a muddled pro-democracy position, where basically we support the protesters, but in a really half-hearted and lukewarm kind of way, because we don't really, we're still too caught up, once again, in this whole U.S.-centric view of the world, and sort of lost sight of the political principles. And in some countries the U.S. is backing the dictators, and in some countries the U.S. seems to be backing the protesters. So we're all confused, and we're sort of for the protesters, but not really. So that unfortunately seems to be the most widespread position on the left. So finally, I think that what unfortunately is going to require serious discussion and grappling with contradictions, which is hopefully what we're going to do here tonight in the probably few minutes remaining to us, but I've gone on too long, which I perennially do, is a clear-headed and unequivocal pro-democracy position. Or again, the word democracy is problematic, given that we're anarchists, but using it in the most broad sense to simply mean, elbow room for freedom, pluralism, and popular participation. And at least, hopefully in the Arab Spring, there's the possibility for the emergence of, some kind of real radical democracy to emerge, and not merely, pro forma, technocratic, Western imposed bourgeois model of democracy. So, let me see what time it is.
7:44.
7:44.